chaos in the morning settles down with another opportunity to talk to a guy who, you can kind of throw any kind of question at him or statement, and he'll generally volley back with a very articulate and synthesized response. Oftentimes, the definition of genius is making something look incredibly complex and making it look very easy. And my guest is actually much more well known for doing that on the bandstand, but it has really been fun to talk to him. And maybe he's aware or not, but the amount of comments that have come in on my YouTube since I put up our first interview has been profound as to the people that have been just so excited to be able to hear my guest talk about his musical career and the influences that his records and his playing have had on these people. One of the more vibrant forums that I've had in the 2,000 interviews that I've put up there. Pat
Wow.
Thrall, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you, man. And thank you for that lovely introduction. It's humbling. I didn't I've only been I've listened to the first one and some of the second one on Spotify. I wasn't even aware of the YouTube side of things. I need to go over there and
No, well, I'm gonna screenshot you. I mean, some of these cats have gone down the rabbit hole with the gear they've tried to, dude, some of this stuff, and then most of it's just been like, Mr. Feinberg, you're doing God's work. Why has it taken so long for somebody to actually interview Pat Thrall? I mean, people are gushing about this stuff. So it's like, I'm like, wow, I've really tapped into this vein. I mean, have you felt like, how have you learned to keep both feet on the ground, Patrick? Like, just the idea of saying, stardom is kind of a two-edged sword. I remember Denny Sywell from Wings, the original drummer. He was like playing with Jackie and Roy, and one night he went over to Pookie's Pub in New York, and Elvin was McCoy. It was McCoy's quartet. This is after Train died, and he asked Elvin to sit in, and Elvin gave him the sticks in the second set, and there's Denny, doing his best he can, and afterwards they're outside and smoking a joint, and Elvin's like, "Man, you can play your ass off, man." And next thing you know, they see this like huge, this big kind of imposing person of color walking down the street, looking pretty disheveled, and Elvin's like, "Hey," he starts calling over to the guy, and Denny's like, "What are you doing, man? Leave this guy alone." And the guy comes over, and it's Art Blakey, and he's like in the midst of one of his like major stupors, like he was really junked
yeah.
out. And just the amount of people that succumbed, or I'm going back to the Jazzers like Eric Dolphy, but I know and you've seen your own peers and comrades. Like, how have you dealt with the two words that that I wanted to ask you about: fame and success, at least the definitions by Western culture?
I don't know. I guess I've I don't consider myself any kind of celebrity or star or anything. I mean, I'm a journeyman. I think if anything, it's just that I've been able to continue in the music industry to now I'm age 70 and I still, I've had an insane busy week and that I'm still involved in the music industry and can still make music and get paid for it. And that's where my head has always been, and not really thinking about being a huge celebrity. I mean, I had a turning point when I was in my early 40s where I've been married to my wife for several years now, for 7 years, and touring with Meatloaf. And we were playing arenas and stadiums and flying first class everywhere. And it was all great. It was all kind of what you dream of. But I hit a point where I felt stagnant and felt that, going out and playing Meatloaf songs, which was great to do. And I'm thankful that for that time and then the success that had and all that. But I just felt stagnant, and I really felt like I needed a total change, and not pursuing another band, not trying to do another Hughes Thrall or whatever. It's like I'd done that. I was in my 40s now. It's like I'm not starting a band in my 40s. I have no interest or energy. I really wanted to get into production and engineering, and Pro Tools was just coming into its own. It was 16 track, I think, at that point. It still had a lot of growing to do, but I saw the future in that. It's like, you know what? I'll never make another demo again, because the process before Pro Tools, basically in home recording, was having a porta studio, a little cassette player that would do 4 or 8 tracks, and
Hmm.
sounded like crap. It was lo-fi. And so you'd put together a really inspired song and arrangement and playing on your little porta studio, but the quality wasn't record quality. So you have to go into the studio and try to replicate that. And you can never get that initial magic that happens with the spark of inspiration. You're chasing that and trying to replicate that. And so when Pro Tools came out, it was like, this is it. I'll never do another demo again. I'll always be making a master recording. And so, because I wanted to get involved in production and engineering more, I bought a Pro Tools system. My wife was the studio manager at the power station at that point. There had been a fire on the top floor. They hadn't used the top floor for years. I had half of it built out into a Pro Tools studio. I'm the only one in New York at that point, as far as I'm aware of, and started doing productions and working with producers and engineers that were recording at the power station. And Pro Tools was very controversial when it first came out. People thought, oh, it's cheating and this is fake. And there was a really bad recording and production that, no disrespect to the Dust Brothers, because I think they've done some amazing records, but they did a Rolling Stones, they produced a Rolling Stones record, and it was all cheap kind of sampling and stuff. It's what you don't want to hear the Rolling Stones as. They're not an electronica band. They're trying to make the Rolling Stones sound,
Right,
uh,
right.
you know, sampling one riff of Keith's and then copying it over and over and over again and all that stuff. And people immediately thought, oh, Pro Tools. If I was working with the Black Crowes and Kevin Shirley was producing and engineering them, and he
Wow.
needed some engineering done on it, so some fixes that were kind of beyond what they could do. They were recording to tape. But the Black Crowes were adamantly against Pro Tools because of that Rolling Stone single. It's like, oh, if you put it into Pro Tools, it's going to ruin the music and make it sound fake. And all it is just who's controlling the technology. That's all it's about, really. Um, and so at first, I took a lot of heat for it, to get some of these classic, amazing engineers that would be working out of the power station, like Neil Dorsman, um, who'd done, Sting and
Sure.
Rates and Bruce Springsteen, and he's an incredible engineer and mixer. And I was mixing a record for this percussionist named Mino Sinaloo, and it was very spacious, and we had a lot of beautiful reverb. And Mino is an incredibly talented multi-instrumentalist. And Neil Dorsman comes upstairs into my Pro Tools room, and we play it for him, and he goes, "Wow, you mix this on a typewriter?" You know, the attitude towards it, and the technicians that worked at the studio would come up and go, "Oh, this Pro Tools stuff, it's just a fad. It's all going to go back to tape." And I'm like, "No, it's not. The genie is out of the bottle." You know.
Wow. What year
And
was that? Like 84? What year was that?
this was 2000, around 2000 or so,
Wow.
2000.
Okay, so much so I this is an interesting thing because I've talked to early on I was fascinated with, you know, why do these records that I love so much from this certain period of time, why does it sound so great? Why does it sound so real? And I was one of these idiots that was like, oh, it's Pro Tools, and then Danny Korchmar, Cooch. I don't know if you ever worked with him before.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, I worked on the Bodyguard soundtrack. Cooch was producing a track when I was playing with a guy named Curtis Stigers, and yeah, I got to work with
wow.
Cooch on that.
So Cooch
Um,
was like, what a long time ago. He's like, it has nothing to do with that. He goes, it's all about how you mic the room. And now, so putting on the engineer hat, I wanted to read this quote to you from another great, I mean, a very not as well known as Ron Tudd or Ed Green or Earl Palmer, but a great LA studio drummer, David Kemper. And he said to me, it reminds me of the way records used to sound. I was an engineer for a short period of time. A guy named Ron Malo taught me. He was the head engineer at Chess Cadet with Chuck Berry, Howlin' Wolf, and those cats. What the old guys would do is set up a room full of musicians. They'd see who needed more bass or more treble in their guitar amp. They did it to sound great in the room. Then they would mic the room instead of miking individuals. That's the way they heard it. Now, that was a profound statement. That was done back clearly in the Chess Cadet days. But I was wondering about your philosophy as it relates to miking a room instead of miking people.
Well, I mean, that approach, that's something that was from, the 30s and 40s, where they would set up one mic for Bing Crosby.
Right.
Place him the closest to the mic, and then the way that they would mix the band, right, which would be a lot of times like a big band, would be the instruments of importance would either be more forward towards the mic or backed up. So the louder instruments, a trumpet or whatever, would be further in the back, and the drums. And that's literally how they balanced it. That was as opposed to doing it with faders. So you'd get the room sound of the whole thing because they had one mic that was picking up everything in the ambient field. So the only reason they did that was because they didn't have that many mics, and they didn't have multi-track recording. I mean, you have to remember that when Miles did Kind of Blue, they only had 3-track recorders then. That's as far as the technology had gone. Elvis, all those early Elvis records were on 3-track. That because that's what was available. So as more and more, as the Beatles and EMI were building, tape machines, Les Paul was expanding the concept of multi-track recording.
Absolutely.
The engineers and the musicians went along. Oh, now we have 8 tracks. Wow, now we can mic the drums that go on one track. Like I did a remix of some Sly Stone stuff back in those days, and some of it was just one mic or 2 mics on the drums because they didn't have all the
exactly what Enrico was talking about. Those early CBS recordings,
yeah.
It was like one mic.
And it was him balancing himself That's
the point. Yeah.
As opposed to having a mic on every single drum. He had to balance. He couldn't hit his cymbals too hard, couldn't hit his hi-hat too hard, or it would disrupt the sound of the rest of the drum sound. So it was, as technology marched forward, so did musicians, and they did it gladly because it was better. You'd have more clarity. So, I think anybody that would choose in this day and age to set up one microphone and record their group that way, that would be very, I don't know, considered artsy. I don't think
I'm thinking Malo. You go back to, again, you're pointing out to Bing Crosby going into Elvis. I'm even going a decade. Again, Sly Stone, late 60s. But let's just talk about, so tell me about how you, early on especially, as you were getting more comfortable developing your producer and engineer chops, like, just give an example of a time when you sort of experimented on miking. How did you mic the room? This is my issues because, and I'm not a musician and I'm definitely not a tech guy, but these words that keep coming up that when I listen to certain kinds of modern music, it seems very hyper compressed. There's not a lot of room sound. And that some of that has to do with miking every part of the drum. There's no, and I just wanted you to talk about how you learned to develop, or what you consider to be good leakage in a recording.
Well, it just depends on what you're doing. So good leakage for me, and what was exciting for us, and it was when the Levee Breaks came out. Andy Johns, using the stairwell, and right. What is it?
Yeah,
he might had a mic at the top of the stairwell that was this huge, ambient space and sounded incredible and made the drum sound huge because it's reflecting in this huge ambient space. And that where before that, his brother Glenn had been using a three mic technique on the drums, and Andy, I think,
Absolutely.
the three mic technique as well as this huge ambient room mic. And that was kind of it kind of brought it back to, oh, room mics add a lot of excitement because it makes it sound like you're in the room with the drums and they sound huge
Exactly.
and all that. And Levee Breaks was really a turning point in introducing more ambience in recordings. All the, the first couple of Zeppelin albums, the drums sounded amazing, but they were pretty dry. There wasn't a lot of ambience on them. Same with most of the Beatles stuff. Drums sounded incredible. Charlie Watts with the Stones sounded incredible, but those were all pretty close mic'd, even though they would only be using 3 or so mics on them. And Levee Breaks was a turning point. Suddenly, everybody wanted that drum sound, that gigantic drum sound, and that was because of the room. Then march forward to 72 when Billy Cobham put out his solo album after he
Spectrum,
was.
yeah.
What's that?
The Spectrum album, yeah.
Exactly. That
Tommy
was
Bolin, actually, Pat Thrall would. I mean, that would have been a perfect. That was in your wheelhouse too. That Bolin. I mean, that was a rock fusion session. You know.
Tommy's playing on that record was an inspiration to me. I studied his playing on that record.
Who's that? Tommy or who'd you say?
But as far as the drum sound on that,
Right.
Hitchcock was the engineer on that record, who was from the Abbey Road crew. He was, he had done the Beatles and Hendrix and tons of people. And for Billy's record, he was the one, as far as I'm aware of, the one that really was. It was the first time that there were separate mics used on every single drum. And what that did was it gave incredible clarity to Billy's playing. And Billy, with those unbelievable chops, having those individual mics on each drum, you could hear so much more of the detail of what he was doing. And that was a game changer. That's when suddenly multi-mic'd drum recording came into being, and people were like, I want that sound that Billy's getting on that record.
Dude, you make the. Before we go on, can you just. What was your dad's role in your life? What was his deal?
Not much. I mean, he died when I was 11. So
okay, I'm sorry to hear that. I was going to say this guy. I'm just saying, like, was he a highly educated cat? I mean, or your mom? I mean, because I just everything that you talk about. Sometimes people talk about stuff, and I have to go back and I listen to it 5 years later. I'm like, oh, now that makes sense. But now I mean, maybe I don't know why it's so articulate, but I mean, what was the essence that he, if anything, that he left to you and your brother and your family?
He was a newspaper man by day.
Wow. Okay, there you go. He was a writer. Yeah.
Writing, and sometimes writing headlines for the paper or whatever. And then at night, both my parents, my mother also worked for the Alameda Times-Star newspaper. She did this society column, some of that. So I grew up around, newspaper.
Okay, so this is why. I mean, your ability to articulate. So he was like
then at night.
Yeah.
Then at night, the family would morph into, we were part of the Little Theater. My grandfather was the president of the local Little Theater. My mother was an actress and a singer. And so we'd spend our evenings at the theater with them rehearsing plays that meant musicals and all that. So I grew up in the theater, and then my mother continued having her day job. And then she would also do one-woman plays and this is where I started getting interested in recording. I was 12, 13 years old.
Right.
Edit tape. She would find instrumental versions of these musicals or have people play piano to these, and then she would perform the entire, like she'd do, West Side Story or whatever. And she was amazing with dialects. And so she would introduce each character and their voice and their dialect. And then as she would continue with going through the entire musical, after a while, she wouldn't have to go. And Billy said, you'd know just for the tone of her voice, which character it was.
Wow.
And then we had to, that's where I learned to edit tape, because she had a a half-inch tape machine that she would record everything to and have to edit all these together.
You were
So I
doing
grew up.
that cutting the tape, splicing and cutting, and that's insane. That's so.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
she was like a full-on thespian.
Totally, yeah, absolutely, and just didn't have success because she wound up having three kids with my dad. So, but she still loved it, and she did it to the day that she died. And I kind of grew up in that environment. But no, I mean, she went to college. I think she went. She only got through being a freshman at college. My dad was a high school dropout. I'm a high school dropout.
Right.
We're not highly educated as
No, no,
for.
I mean like, but I mean it was so beautiful because that generation. I mean, the amount of like street scholars and how well it didn't matter. You could say that you could still get a job, not even as a musician, but without an education, formal education. But you guys still wound up educating yourselves. I mean, it wasn't like you were sitting around distracted by brain
No,
rot and just staring at, like, so much sort of atrophy and vegetation that goes on now. It was like you didn't have time to be restricted by the school. There was too much other stuff to learn that was
yeah.
too exciting. You were motivated to learn, just not sitting at a desk. I don't,
When we
I have
moved,
to believe,
Yeah, when we moved to Oakland, I had to go to Oakland Tech there, which was a primarily all black school. And this was right in the middle of, this is early 70s when the Black Panthers,
oh my God, dude. Yeah, no, Eldridge Cleaver.
that was all happening when I went to Oakland Tech. I was one of maybe 10 or so white kids going to the school at that point.
You would walk outside and there'd be like Black Panther rallies going on.
They were kind of, they were like junior.
That's so insane.
I mean, the kids were angry, and it could be scary because I had long hair. They kind of cut me a break, like, well, yeah, you're kind of taking the heat from the man as well because you bring
Right,
it.
exactly. You're not getting your ass kicked. Oh, you're getting your ass kicked by the cops, or theoretically, yeah, you're not
Like you,
against us. Yeah.
okay, you're good. But the school was scary, man. There was an ambulance pulling up every other day. It was, and eventually the kids shouting down the teachers, and it
Yeah.
was crazy. So I started cutting school to go to the library to do exactly what you were saying, to educate myself.
That is profound. What were you, 14? I mean, you
Yeah.
were, wow. Wow. I mean, see, I don't want to get too far adrift here. So the cob of the miking technique that was used on Spectrum, it worked with Billy because he was so, I mean, it was just so precise. All his licks, all his chops were just like, you could hear it all. But then over time, that full the miking of the full drum kit, did the sound get muddier over time? I mean, there's only one Billy Cobb. You know what I'm trying to say? I mean, what is your idea? I mean, I know it depends on the session. I guess maybe the better question is, could you talk about a time early in your, producing engineering career that you experimented sort of in an Andy Johns kind of way, but you did it your way, really weren't sure how it was going to turn out, but it wound up being a seminal recording?
Um, for me, I mean, the multi miking technique on drum kits has become such a standard that, again, if you're doing anything less than that, if you're doing something with three mics or whatever, that's considered kind of edgy and artsy in a sense.
Artsy. I love that word. I mean, that's me though. So you're telling me that's not commercial though.
It's not the standard. The
The
standard,
standard, that's the right word. Yeah.
I would say that 90+% of drum recordings are probably multi-mic drum recordings. I mean, it's just
Right.
what engineers prefer and mixers prefer because it gives you total control over the drum kit. And then you add multiple room mics. I mean, there's an engineer that I work with who's absolutely brilliant. His name is Mark Gray. He was the head engineer at the studio at the Palms out here, and now he's back in New York. And this guy will set up 30 plus microphones in the room. I mean, all kinds of different arrays of room mics and mics set up in corners to get a completely different sound there. And he'll use, then give you an option. He'll have within all his multi-miking every single drum within that configuration. He'll also have the three mic technique built,
Oh,
three mics that in the Glenn John school. So he has that as an option, so you can bring up almost, different eras of drum sounds within the one drum recording that he does.
Okay, that is superior. That is pretty badass. That's
Yeah,
badass. Yeah.
and and I did this drum library. It's one of the first multi-track drum libraries from a company called TuneTrack, and the drum library is called Superior Drummer. And we did that at three major New York studios: a Power Station, Hit Factory, and a Lair, which is upstate. And those are all really big drum rooms. And we
Yeah.
used, again, Neil Dorsman, it was engineering. Now Neil Dorsman loves Pro Tools. Back then he was making fun of it and torturing me.
Yeah, it's funny how people come around, you know?
Yeah, it's like, well, when you start losing work and people are going, oh, you don't know how to use Pro Tools? Oh, we're going to hire Pat Thrall.
Yeah, you get the learning curve pretty quick there, you know?
Yeah, Neil's a brilliant engineer, just brilliant. And so we did this drum library, and same thing. If you bring it up, it comes up on about 30 plus channels of various room mics from the furthest. Alaire was this. It was built in the early 20s and was used for chamber music. These rich people would have, a little string quartet would come out or whatever. And it was this beautiful, huge sounding room. I don't know, 30-foot ceilings, and Neil put some mics in the back of the room as well. That sounds like it's coming out of a reverb or a chamber. And again, multiple mic setups that you can get completely different sounds with how you're blending in the rooms. So as opposed to committing to just putting up one mic and try to have the band set up and be pre-mixing, physically mixing, you now have all the control to do all that. So I don't see anything wrong with that. Now, maybe part of what you could be responding to is that it's so much up to the drummer. A lot of drummers, first off, are oriented, at least the guys that aren't studio professionals, they're live drummers. So they're used to their band members going, dude, hit the snare harder. I can't hear it. Or hit
right. Bashing, yeah.
And they want the drums to be loud. And so these guys are used to playing, live and smashing their cymbals and smashing the hi-hat. And that is the worst thing you can do when you're recording a drum kit. The thing that you want to do, and the thing that people don't understand about John Bonham, is it sounds like he is throwing himself at every snare hit and every tom hit because it sounds so loud. But he wasn't hitting the drum that hard. He was doing basically what's a karate chop. He was hitting the drum and then getting off of it and hitting and drawing the tone out of it. And the guys that are the true studio masters understand that. Like a Charlie Drayton, this guy mixes his drum kit perfectly within his playing, and he's not smashing the cymbals. He's not hitting the snare drum as hard as he can and leaving the drumstick on it, because that kills all the tone. He's not hitting his kick drum with a pedal, then ending up and resting on the kick drum before he unleashes it for the next hit, which kills the sound of the kick drum. He's finessing and drawing the tone out of it. And so all like
I want to ask you something. This is really, so you're just setting aside the guys that you know and that you record with. I mean, that's kind of, Bonham was doing the karate chop because it was plenty of force, enough so that it sounds like he's smashing even though he's not. Because if he overdid it, there'd be it would just sound like, noise. I mean, is there too many modern recordings where the engineer and the producer do not recognize that the drummer is smashing and it's just too much and they never correct that?
I mean, but some guys, that have been playing like that for years, to have them back off, it's like they don't know how to back off because they never had.
It's too late. Yeah.
Yeah. But studio pros know this, and they understand what they're feeding into their mics, like a Charlie Drayton, like a Steve Jordan, like a Jet Picardo. I mean, those drums just don't sound good because there's great engineering, which there obviously is great engineering going on as well. But it's what they're generating out of their instrument. Like Michael Shreve, who's so hyper aware of how he hits the drum, and he'll sit there, and I've seen him analyze the different tones that he can get from the different kinds of hits that he's doing, and then implement that in the song and the arrangement that you're doing. I mean, that's, that cuts between the pros and the guys and the wannabes that come in and have no idea, because all they've ever done is hit the drums as hard as they ever could.
This is fascinating stuff. I mean, I wanted to ask you about Well, this ties in perfectly because when I asked Preston, we had such a great hang, and that guy's a legend, and but he was kind of young, and he was doing overdubs on the Cookin' Mama album, and
Hmm.
obviously it's first off, I think it's fair to say, and I'm not sure if this is documented because it came out as a book with one of those floppy records, was that Rock Improv.
Yeah.
That might have been the first recording ever at Different Fur. I'm just saying that might have been the first
It was
recording.
really, really early, and it was definitely very early. It was a
Because
new studio.
I don't, the only things that I see coming out of there, Coke Escovedo 75, Lenny White 77. I mean,
Oh wow,
Apocalypse Now 80,
yeah,
nothing from 72, 73. Anyway, that was one thing. But what I
that's
wanted to ask you about, there's two things here. Because it was like in this, I had this flash and I wasn't tripping out. It was just like somehow Steve Miller was involved in producing that album. Is that
yeah. But
correct?
here's the deal, though. It's not the Steve Miller. It's just a
Okay.
guy.
Okay.
Steve
Because
Miller.
I was tripping out. I'm like, maybe Pat was
No,
really hungry and he went down to the Matrix, Marty Ballin's place, and was cooking the groove. And Miller got up on the bandstand, was blowing harp, and was like, "Yo, man, you want to do something?" So anyway, I guess more the better question is, and this may pain you, but with this re-release, how was the original Cookin' Mama recorded? Because I think it was below par.
actually, the I don't know if you've heard the remastered one that's out now. I don't know if you've
Not
heard any.
yet. No, not in its entirety. No.
That it sounds so much better. The original one was the mix was done in one day, so it wasn't it had some issues, I guess, but but then the mastering was terrible, and I call mastering the last chance to fuck it up. So you get it right in mastering the whole thing, and unfortunately, it was
Oh wait, so
mastered.
you're telling, I want to be clear. Mastering youth in your mind as little as should be done as possible to not fuck it up.
Right. I mean, that's what I'm saying, though. But mastering,
Exactly. No, and this person just went way over the top and totally. So it was pretty good coming out with the mixes were pretty good. The
yeah, but
original.
I don't know what original, which original have you heard? Because there's the bootlegs are what's been out there. We only printed 1,000 copies, so
Dude,
there,
I know, dude, that record is expensive. The original pressing of that, if you've got
yeah,
a few of those in your closet, you could retire, man.
yeah, we do. We actually we are going to make those available at some point, but I don't want that to be what's representative of
I
Kokomo.
did. I did. So 1,000 records of the professional stuff, but then were released. But then there's a bunch of bootlegs out.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of that stuff is mastered, is not even master. I mean, it's guys that have the vinyl that ran it out of their cheap little converters,
Oh God, yeah,
and scratchy,
yeah.
scratches on the record, and there's no low end and there's no punch to it. It's just, and the guys that it's just, the bootlegs are just atrocious. I can't, even stand it. That's one of the
Well,
reasons.
no, I want to go back to the one. So the ones that were pressed, though, the ones that made because you were very articulate about this. You didn't. It wasn't national distribution. It was. Can you just talk about the label, where it was recorded? Was it Pacific High Record? I'm just fascinated with the whole product. And then ultimately, like, was it just a regional distribution, like sort of the Bay Area kind of thing? How did that work?
We did the album primarily because we were breaking up. I was moving into this band called Rags. I told you about them.
I don't
Um,
think we really vetted that yet. But yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
so we kind of merged the two bands together for the album. It was this group Rags and Cook and Mama. So we
Rags.
used singer in Rags on some of the songs. We used the keyboard player Jesse Harms on some of the songs on the Cook and Mama album. And so it was kind of this merging really of two bands. They were doing the songs that Tommy Thompson and Paul Hahn and I wrote. We were doing any of their songs. They were just on as additional performers. Paul Hahn, uh, he funded, not basically, he funded the album. I forget what he came up with, and back in those days, it was a lot of money for a musician. He came up with $3,000 or something to pay for the recording. We did it at a recording studio in Marin County called The Church that the Sons of Champlin worked out of a lot. And that was,
I cannot, this is making my day. Was it called the church?
yeah, it was called The Church.
And
And
what city was it, in Sausalito, San Anselmo? Where was it?
it was Stan Anselmo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I have this that church was used on more than, anyway, continue. I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, a lot of people recorded. It was a great studio. It was an 8-track recorder. I believe 2-inch. No, maybe it was 1-inch 8-track recording. The great sounding room. It They had some nice mics there. They had some really amazing engineers. A guy named Bruce Walford was the main engineer on the record. And did the mixes, which we kind of did fairly quickly, and then were destroyed in mastering. And yeah, that's where we did the record. And we didn't know what we were doing. And Bruce kind of what helped us. He kind of was a co-producer in a sense of just because he was so experienced in the studio. And we'd only been in the studio a couple of times before that. But I recommend that to check it out. After not listening to it for many, many years because of the horrible bootleg versions that were out there, I couldn't listen to them. It was just so horrible. And then when Tommy Thompson had the masters, it's like, oh, we can reprint these and remaster the record from the clean original master copy, and the difference is amazing. You should check it out. It's pretty interesting. But the album, we only printed 1,000 up. We were selling them at gigs, but we were kind of winding down. The band was winding down and moving into other directions and stuff. So we gave some away, but that was it. There was no label. It was our little label on there. I forget what it was even called. Some Steve.
I love, and I can't remember the name now. I have to look it up. It was such a classic. I'm like, that really was a record label, but I think you guys just made that up. I mean, that
yeah, I got the album here. Recorded to the Church, Outlaw Productions.
Yeah.
Let me see.
So I mean, in terms of like, when you like, in terms of looking back at that time, you were sort of, it was a bunch of co-written songs by 2 different bands, but in some ways it was like
all the material was written by Tommy Thompson, Paul Hahn, and myself. And again, the guys from Rags, we just brought them in as extra performers to add like keyboards, organs. Tommy Thompson also played keyboards, but Jesse is a phenomenal keyboard player and organ player. There's on the first song, and we reordered the album too. We didn't like the order that the original album was in, and we renamed the album. It was originally called New Day, and now
the label is Rock Bottom.
Yeah, Rock. We made that up. That was us.
Dude, that's the greatest. That is, you knew exactly what you were in for. I mean, that was unbelievable. I need you to talk about this cat though. Because your brother was raving about him and nobody really knows what happened to him. Maybe the last time he was spotted in Alaska, Vince Palazzato.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. Recently, I've been in touch with his ex-girlfriend who was our manager for a few years.
No way.
And Vince kind of disappeared up in Alaska and nobody knew, like, is he okay? Is he, hiding out from the mob or what's going on? I mean, in Alaska, and he's been up there and then nobody could find him. I think Tommy got in touch with him many, many years ago, 15, 20 years ago or something. And then that was it. Everyone kind of lost contact. But according to his ex-girlfriend, he's still doing good and up there playing, but we haven't heard from him or anything. I don't know if he's heard the record or, the re-release or whatever, but he was a fantastic drummer. And he was kind of the equivalent of Tommy Aldridge in the Pat Travers band, the drummer for Travers.
Talk about those parallels.
Right. Well, because Vince was a Buddy Rich, student, of Buddy Rich, not physically in the room with Buddy, but studied that kind of play. It was an incredible technician, had incredible chops, using double bass drums back then, which was early on,
That's insane.
and was just for the encore song that we had, or with the last song of the set. It's called Out the Door. And Vince would take his drum solo, and it was a guaranteed encore after that, because he would tear the house down every night. And this is the same thing with the Travers Band. We could be having a really shitty night until Tommy Aldridge should take his drum solo, would tear down the house every night, and it was a guaranteed encore every night. And he and Vince were, same kind of thing. They were like the guy that you could count on every single night.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the point, is that you go back to the, that people call it Santeria, but that's a Latin term for African rhythms. But I mean, you conjure up the spirits with that stuff, and then everybody's, whatever was bugging you or whatever was dragging you down in your thinking mind, that all just floats away, and that's the beautiful thing, especially when it's done in a sophisticated way.
Yeah, and so the album in its remastered form now, you can just hear things so much clearer, and it's such a difference, and it's available. cookandmama.band, is what we're using instead of .com. We're using .band. I'd never seen that before, and when we were looking for what our web address is, like, oh, this is cool. No, I haven't seen anybody use .band. I'm sure a lot of people are now, of course, because it's so cool.
I haven't seen that at all, but I was going to say, the other thing just to layer on it is, if it really just takes off, I mean, we're going to need to have a Cook and Mama, Nevada, a couple nights in Reno, maybe a little tour to promote the reissue, the re-release.
Yeah, that'd be fun. But check it out. If you go to cookandmama.band and you go to the store page, there's we're selling it through that page, so you can purchase it. And right now it's just for purchase, so we can kind of make some money back and pay for, because we put some time into the website and all that. We wanted to make it. It's got the full history of the band in there, of every member.
Oh, that's great.
Tommy Thompson has written a book basically that you can go to in the website in the history page and read. I mean, the guy's memory is phenomenal. There's millions of stories about the band, our origins, our brief encounter we became Jesus freaks for a year or so in there, and
oh boy,
with a Christian cult as a band, and then left
were you? I just want to be clear. The other thing that was going on, I know this is not Christian, but were you? Champlin was in, and so was Marla Hunt Hansen. This band called the Fairfax Street Choir. Did you ever cross paths with those cats?
Man, I never.
No, I know. Believe me, dude. I'll send you, because they did a couple of records, and I mean, when you said cult, it's just I flashed on that, because that was part of the Sufi choir, Aludine Matthew, all this. It was a little bit before you, but not really. More Marin County.
No, but I never heard it, at least that I can recall.
So before we wrap this section, I've been listening. It's so funny, man, because the spirits prevail. I'm digging through a record shop on Sunday, and there's not really much there. But then all of a sudden, I'm in the I guess reggae section, and for $10, there's a copy of Language Barrier, Sly and Robbie, and I'm been listening to that record, and I'm wondering about if you can just talk about, I mean, there's a bunch of luminary cats on there. How did you originally connect? Did you go to Jamaica? How did you connect with those guys?
Man, it was Michael Shreve. When I first moved back to New York in 1985, I didn't really know a lot of people in New York at that point, and Michael was there and was like, oh man, I got to hook you up with this guy named Bill Laswell.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Okay, fantastic. Laswell, geez. And I went to the studio, and he was just so relaxed and just had this kind of carefree attitude about, let's just, whatever happens, let's go.
Yeah, I love it.
Car amp with me. I had a Rockman. Remember those? The Tom Schultz thing, and I used that, and he was like, "Ah, that's fine. Fuck it. Use the Rockman." It's like, okay. my gear hadn't moved everything out to New York. And so I played on that, and I'll have to look back on that because I can't remember now.
Again,
Which,
I got to tell you, brother Thrall, again, it's sublime insanity you're playing. It's insane. And I just don't, to me, it sounds like there was, I don't know how it was pieced together. It doesn't necessarily sound like there's just this one track. Well, there's a couple of tracks, but the first one, and I'm like listening to it, and I'm listening to Here for You, and then at the end of the tune, there you are coming in again, and I'm not saying it's similar, but it's called Make 'em Move. That's the tune, Make 'em Move, and it's an 8-minute track, and I don't know when you come in, 6-minute mark, and it's just like it's like that crossing the line vibe again. It's starting to go higher and higher and higher and higher.
well, here's the thing.
Yeah.
I just remembered from that first session that I had with Laswell on Sly and Robbie. I come in, I plug the Rockman in, and then he's sitting there. He goes, He's thinking like, oh, what'd be cool to do? And then he looks at his engineer. He goes, turn the tape over. I'm like, what? So he turns the tape over, to get the backwards thing. And so you have to think backwards when you turn the tape over, because you don't want to start high because you're going to end the song high. So you have to start low and kind of down dynamically, and then work your way into it. So it was just so funny that the very first thing that I did with him, I'm listening to all this swirling backwards stuff. And I think Herbie was on that track too, but I could, you just kind of, the drums are swelling and doing all this. So my first experience was Bill was playing with backwards music. It was hilarious.
And what you're trying to say there is, though, you start low or start not quiet, and then you build up. I mean, that's
you start high, because that's where the solo is going to wind up when you flip the tape back over.
That is so weird. I mean, dude, that, and then there's this other tune I cannot stop listening to. It's called Miles, and then in parentheses Black Satin, and it's also, I haven't even gotten to side B yet, but it's just, it clearly you were called in for overdubs, though. This was not something where people were hitting at the same time.
And again, I have to review the record. It's been so long since I've heard it. I don't remember.
Dude,
Same thing.
Nasty, nasty, nasty situation. I'm just saying that first tune, I was like, where's Thrall? Because, I mean, there's so many cats on it. It's hard to know if you played on every tune. And then all of a sudden, this backward playing comes in, and it's insane. It was like, oh, there he is. And it just keeps going and going.
The second Sly and Robbie album I did was Bass and Trouble. I don't know. Wow. That record is incredible as well, but it was crazy. So Laswell calls me, asks me to come in. It's like, okay, great, another Sly and Robbie record. I come in. Now I had an amp this time, thanks goodness. It's my pedals, and the only thing that he had recorded at this point was the drums on it for every song. It was all in Fairlights. All on Fairlight drums, and Bootsy playing guitar, not playing any bass. It's just Bootsy on guitar and the drums for every song on the album.
Oh my God.
So that's how Bill mapped out every song, and then he was going to add everything to that. So he had me play on, they did a cover of Fire, right, by Ohio Players.
Sure.
A couple of other songs as well. And he wanted me to do the big rock guitar stuff, right? And there was some of it like on Fire and all that stuff where I had to lock in with Bootsy, who was an amazing rhythm guitar player. I had no idea. So funky, such a deep pocket. And I had to lock in this gigantic, super distorted sound into Bootsy's beautifully clean, pocketed stuff. And that was a challenge for me because it just required so much control to keep because Bill wanted like this giant metal sound in with the funk stuff, and it was just wild. And just listening to Bootsy and the drums that Bill had programmed. And then me having to overdub a solo here or there or whatever, it was just so interesting. He did talk about a guy that thinks out of the box. That's Bill Laswell.
Well, and he's not sweating anything. I mean, I want to be clear though, Bass in Trouble and Language Barrier kind of around the same time, because I'm looking here at a 45 that I guess was released, Sly and Robbie Bass in Trouble. And it's two track. One side A is Bass in Trouble, and side B is the track that I listened to this morning, driving back from dropping my younger daughter off at school, Miles, Black Satin. And I'm wondering, so Bootsy was playing like these sort of like just rhythm chords, and then you just blew, because that must be Bass in Trouble, because there was no blowing solo on Miles, but Miles, Black Satin, check that tune out. That tune and Make 'Em Move. I mean, that stuff is for that time too. I mean, you can just tell that it was experimental, and it worked.
Oh yeah, that's Laswell, fearless, totally. And it's funny that you said Miles, Black Satin. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I did a remix with Charlie Drayton and Vince Wilburn. Geez, probably almost 20 years now. A Miles remix where we had the multi-tracks for Miles records. And the label wanted to put out a greatest hits of Miles called Evolution of the Groove, where it would basically be marking where Miles was in the 50s and late 50s, of the kind of blue period with this cool swing stuff.
Sure.
And as he progressed through the 70s, going more and more and with Tony Williams now in the band and moving more towards 4/4 and rock.
Jack Johnson, yeah. Bitches Brew.
The fusion hybrid and all that stuff. And marking that till like the 70s, till around the corner or one of the records. Anyway, so they were like, okay, and this is Pro Tools, this is 2002. So Pro Tools is still, newish. And they were like, the CBS was like, what can you guys do? Can you do something like, because Miles loved technology. He would have been all over Pro Tools. He would have had a rig set up and going nuts on it.
Oh, dude, that dude was cutting tape with Tio Macero. He was freaking out.
Exactly. They were doing it on tape. Exactly right. I mean, he was just he loved technology. And so he would have been all over it. So the idea was, the label had, the CBS Legacy had, was like, can you guys, and this is all through Vince Wilburn, who I don't know if you're aware of him.
No, I've interviewed Vince, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Obviously. He played with Miles in the 90s. He's his cousin or something.
Exactly. Yeah, he's his nephew too.
Yeah, nephew. That's right. Yeah.
This is all through Vince, through the label. But everybody knew everybody. And Charlie Drayton's in there. Lenny Wyatt came in on one song, did some programming. And you got to check this out, man. It's like,
I will.
It was scary as hell, because here we have Miles Davis multi-tracks, I mean, we have the Kind of Blue 3-track, I mean, it was nuts.
Oh my God, dude. That is just like, I mean, even for Thrall, dude, you must have been shaking in your boots, dude.
Oh man. I mean, a couple of Miles hats set up in the studio every day, and it's the whole thing that we do, we challenge ourselves with, is like, what would Miles do? We're trying to fit like him, you're trying to, which is next to impossible, but what would he do? What would he like? What would he want in this, And check it out. It's called Evolution of the Groove. It's an EP. Carlos Santana's on it. A bunch of people are on it. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I'm pretty proud of it. And we thought we were going to get crucified in the reviews, right? You're touching God, right? And the majority of the reviews on it were exceptionally positive, and it's just an EP, so it only goes on for, I don't know, 13, 14 minutes tops. And a lot of the people that reviewed it were like, we just wish it was longer. It was like, wow, we were not expecting that. We thought we were going to get absolutely crushed.
And you're talking about taking his stuff and just doing sort of this sonic stream of consciousness through line for about 20 or about 15 years or so.
Yeah, we were making it where it was kind of what was going on in the early 90s, like stuff coming out of England or whatever, where I'm gritting the tracks. I'm making it so we can add drum loops and effects and do all kinds.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, it's a whole thing. We have Nas rapping on one song. There's one song, Evolution of the Groove. Not Evolution of the Groove. famous jazz song that in my brain, this is where 70 is not fun.
All right.
Oh,
It'll come. You know
uh,
why people liked it though is
so,
you weren't too pressed. Yeah.
the song that goes da 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 bum da 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 bum the gavin da 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 da
Well,
da.
it's a Miles original.
Yeah, no, it's a like a kind of a classic.
American
Oh,
Songbook kind of thing. Yeah.
man, I can't. Oh, I can't believe it. I can't remember. Anyway, it was one of the few tapes that once the whole tape was Miles rehearsing that song, Freedom Jazz Dance.
Of course.
Freedom Jazz, and it's the band rehearsing. They recorded the rehearsal in the studio. I guess they wanted to have any ideas that may happen, they could then pluck out or something. And this is Tony on drums. I think it was Ron Carter on bass.
Sure.
And Miles. And at one point, Miles is talking to the guy. And talk about fearless. Miles was fearless in the studio. He's having Tony do all kinds of crazy. Yeah, man, try some of that shit on your blocks. And he's hitting blocks. And no cowbell on that. I mean, he's just trying like stuff that'd be like, what's that got to? He was fearless. You just try anything. And if it doesn't work,
I
it
think
doesn't
it
work.
was very, it was, I mean, it was tasteful. And honestly, I think the reason the reviews are positive is because, yeah, I mean, everybody wants it to be longer when that first, 13 minutes, but you just hit them with that quick, it's better to do it high quality, quality over quantity, and to me, you could put out something 30 minutes long, but if it starts to, fall off after 15 minutes, you got the best of the best. To me, like with Miles,
I mean, and so on this one on this Freedom Jazz Dance thing, Miles is asking, he's talking about because the line is really continuous, it just it's the line doesn't stop for the whole thing. And at one point, you hear Miles saying, like in a really quiet voice, "Man, that shit is hard." And he goes, "Here's how we're gonna do it." He's scat singing, and then he stops and he leaves a pause. Then he goes, then leaves a pause because he wants to break the line up and not play it in one sequential order of the way the line is because it was too difficult for him. So he broke it up, which made it even cooler. But he's scat singing each line to the guys, and it's like, oh my God, I have Miles Davis scat singing. Hello, this is like
that's absurd. That is absolute. Well, that's actually so freak. That's like pulling behind the curtain. That is so freaking awesome.
What I did was Lenny White had programmed a groove. I cut Miles up and put him in time with the groove, right? And we got Miles scat singing, and then with Nas rapping about it. It's and Vince playing drums under Nas and stuff. It's that kind of, so it's this hybrid recording stuff that's going on that was very cool and fun to do and challenging and scary at points too. But check it out, Evolution of the
I will.
Groove.
No, I'm going to check that. I'm going to check the new Cooking Mama, and I will listen, Pat. I'll send you Arico's contact info. I think he's getting back in September, but definitely reach out to him. And when I'm up in,
I'll send you the Cooking Mama too,
yeah.
so you.
Well, I was going to say when I'm up in Vegas, the next interview we do, it's going to be in person.
Fun.
All right. And much love to you, man. Thank you for everything. It's been so cathartic to sort of, and I'm going to send you some screenshots of these comments because you're going to really, you can call yourself a journeyman with your own niche, but your legacy is well intact. And I think that that's probably the most important thing we can do in this life is leave a legacy. That's it.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, man. Thank you very much.
All right, man. Yo, we'll be in touch, man. Much love to you, brother.
Thank you. Same to you, my man.
All right, be cool.
Take care.
Yeah, bye.